Started. Good evening. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, September 12th, 2018. We are in the Freeport High School Library. We're waiting on Sarah, who I think will be joining us, and our other empty seat is for the student rep, which I don't think they have elected yet. So hopefully shortly we'll have another member from the high school here to join us, but we'll get started this evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so do we have a motion for consideration and approval for the minutes for the June 13th, 2018, June 20th, 2018, and August 22nd, 2018 minutes as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Vali, second from Maddie, thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. June 13th sounds so long ago. Okay, adjustments to the agenda?
We do have one this evening. I'd like to include the consideration of including the position of data specialist / project manager to the RSU 5's PLD retirement plan under main purse. And I'd like to do that immediately following my report on the opening of schools.
Good news and recognition?
None?
No good news?
Well, I mean, there
well, that's a depressing way to start the evening. Sorry, folks, there's no good news. Public comment.
Hi there. I'm Carol Grimm from Freeport. I'm here tonight to ask you to consider the effects the current avalanche of screen time in and around school is having on our children. The world we live in is moving so fast, and we don't seem to have thought through the ramifications of such. The stream of research about the negative health effects of technology on kids is turning into a torrent. I'm wondering what, if anything, is being done to address this in RSU 5. A recent U.S. News and World Report article surveyed 8th, 10th, and 12th graders between 1991 and 2016, measuring well-being, self-esteem, and happiness. It found such well-being suddenly decreased after 2012 and directly correlated it to the amount spent on electronics, the amount of time spent on electronics. Another study in San Diego State University says spending too much time on screens is a threat to mental health. Several large studies stated 3 hours a day or more, especially 4 to 5 hours, linked it to unhappiness and depression. It is what children and adolescents are exposed to with screens that helps or harms them. Where screen time becomes an issue is when it is displacing more productive or meaningful activities. There is a dramatic increase in young people whose gaming, social media, or info binging resulted in sleep deprivation, school failure, anxiety, and depression. So I would ask, how much time are students actually on screens during doing schoolwork? Does anyone know? I certainly know my kids are magicians when it comes to changing their screens when I walk by at home. If you go by the Freeport Library any day after school, after laptops are handed out, you can see how many kids are glued to their laptops rather than playing outside or reading a book. It's startling and quite a sight to see, especially when sports aren't going on. When I asked the superintendent about this, she compared kids on school laptops today being much like TV we had growing up. It's not the same, not even close. We never did homework on televisions. Either our parents could shut the TV off or there wasn't one to watch. Today we have to walk away with the response of, "But Mom, I have to finish my homework." So how many hours a day are students on screens at school? Take that and add in another 2 or 3 hours for high school kids at home, and we as parents can do nothing about it. The administration's response, and we have mentioned this in the past, is to ask to do work with pen and paper. This is impractical in the high school. Even leaving a laptop at school would be a significant penalty for any child who chose to do so. Recently, the heads of Google and Facebook launched Truth About Tech, warning parents, teachers, and students that the tech they use is in fact engineered to addict them. The site states more children can maneuver a tablet than they can swim, tie their shoelaces, or tell time. Melinda Gates spent her career in tech. She quoted, "For adolescents who don't yet have the emotional tools to navigate life's complications and confusions, screens can exacerbate the difficulties of growing up." The school laptops currently provide students with a computer that is wide open and can access pretty much anything. There are filters we use at home, but they're woefully ineffective. There is always a smarter mouse, and these kids are pretty smart. Parents should not have to police the school device. The laptop should be designed for schoolwork. Teachers are most qualified to provide the best sites for learning, and for those students who might need educational games to learn, that can be provided as well. The laptop should change from a smartphone to a purely educational device. Lastly, I understand the high school teachers are the police for cell phone usage in their classrooms. Do they really need another thing to enforce and monitor on top of what they're already doing? If they allow kids to use smartphones in class, is it fair to those who don't have one? Kids can survive without cell phones while class is in session. Allowing them cell phone use in the class setting is fueling the addictive nature of the smartphone. So again, I ask what is being done to help this issue in RSU 5. A recent shutdown of laptops from 12 to 5 a.m., good job, is a step forward in the right direction, but all-encompassing usage of screens should be considered for the well-being of the RSU 5 students. So in conclusion, I'm asking the board to review the current laptop and cell phone policy in the schools. In its current state, the policy is irresponsible and from current research is doing untold and irreparable harm to our children. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Hi, welcome back. Cap Wallingford, Freeport. I have a couple of questions, and excuse me if I'm maybe misunderstanding. So our high schoolers, now I have a middle schooler and high schooler, and then one off to college, praise the Lord. Their buses are coming 15 minutes earlier. The high schoolers are staying 15 minutes later, or 10 minutes later, I'm sorry. So altogether, it's about a 25-minute extra time in high school and junior high. And the Moore Street kids and under, so K through 5, are starting 10 minutes earlier. So when I could figure out with Dennis, the bus coordinator, who was fantastic, so thank you, Dennis, the reason the buses are coming earlier is because Moore Street and K through 5 are starting earlier, but our high school is staying later. So I was in hopes that perhaps we could coordinate this effort, and so both schools either start earlier or both schools end later. So I really need the buses, and I think a lot of us do need the buses. I don't want my kids standing in that lobby an extra 10 minutes each morning, and that's what they're doing. I'd rather have them, sleep that extra 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm not sure if that was just a miscoordination. So if you all could look into that, and perhaps we have the opportunity to make it so it's consistent that schools either start 10 minutes earlier together or start 10 minutes later or stay 10 minutes later together. And then the habits of work, this is a comment. I had my awesome little 10th grader, Alexandria. She had this great session they did in school where they did role playing about habits of work. Both of my kids really would love to get 4s in habits of work, but have been told that it's almost impossible to get 4s in habits of work. And quite frankly, I've challenged them. I want you to get 4s, because when I was a kid, it was the one thing I could get a 4 in. Even if I got a C or an A+, I could get my homework in, and I could be interested in my classwork. Even if I wasn't the smartest kid, I could still get that bonus credit, is what we called it back in the day. So the teacher that did such an excellent job to explain what habits of work was, his name, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, Jeffrey, Drherberg. He did great role playing, so the kids understood what was a bad habit of work and what was a good habit of work. But my biggest concern is I want my children to know how to get a 4, and each of them feels strongly they can only get 3s unless they're already an A student. So that would be something I'd really like to have something on paper for our children. 8th grade and 10th grade are my 2 children. something that says, okay, if you do this, this, and this, you are going to get a 4. Right now, they really think that no matter what they do, they can only get a 3 because they may not potentially be, an A student per se. So those are my 2 comments. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry, a little distracting. First off, let me say this might belong in part of the workshop.
It's a brand new year. Tell us who you are.
That's right. I'm sorry. I feel like I know you all. My name is Pam Barry Santos. I am the parent of a 4th grader at Mast in Freeport. This may go under the workshop, but I was very confused as to what the workshop was. I didn't think it was advertised, so I don't know if parents are supposed to speak during the workshop that's happening at this meeting. I didn't get any robocalls. I didn't get any emails announcing what it was or what's going to happen in the next hour. So this is all about PBE. Shocking, I'm sure. All right. I just want to say also, I think many parents appreciate that the board listened last year when we had immediate concerns about the grading, but many of us have ongoing concerns that haven't yet been addressed. The real benefits of PBE have not been shown. We've heard that they benefit kids, but we've seen no evidence to back it up. After repeated requests for research that supports the district's move, RSU5 website now lists research/articles, but they're not only not research, at least not unbiased, peer-reviewed, real research. The articles focus on purported deficiencies with traditional systems. They don't show any research supporting PBE as providing a solution. One of the articles seems to unequivocally support PBE and its grading and measurement scheme, and it's co-authored by somebody whose whole livelihood depends on him selling his books and his consulting services about PBE. It doesn't contain any research. It also self-cites quite a bit. I believe 10 out of the 16 citations in that article are referencing himself and his other articles. He tells us that there's a problem and a solution, but it doesn't give us any supporting information showing that it's effective or beneficial. That article is indicative of almost every bit of supporting documentation that I've been able to find when we're asked how we're supposed to know, or when we're asking how we're supposed to know if PBE actually benefits kids. Meanwhile, there are states across the country that are starting to dabble in this, and they've got Thomas Gusky speaking to them. He was down in Connecticut last week talking to them. And I still can't find any evidence that education is improving in any of those districts. Some of them are actually starting to report that they've had a recent decline in some of their metrics. The similarities between what this author is telling people, between professional performance reviews used by employers and how to assess students, is a bit concerning for me. I just don't see how we foster learning in kids the same way we assess how employers evaluate their employees. I think the way a child learns is much more nuanced and affected by the age, the subject matter, and the teacher. Teachers, not administrators, should have more say in how they feel they can best teach, reach, and assess their students. And I'm not saying I believe that there shouldn't be any structure or core concepts shared among teachers and classes, but we're turning teachers into robots who are given a checklist that they need to complete for every little aspect of our kids' education. It's no wonder that kids are losing interest in learning and seem to be less engaged. They can tell when something is rote. And when they hear they can retake a test or there's no penalty for turning work in late, many hear, this work is not that important. Because if you minimize the consequence, you certainly minimize its importance, and motivation wanes with it. The argument that PBE opens up other avenues for kids to learn and get engaged, that aspect isn't new or unique to PBE. My teachers did that 35 plus years ago. My teachers had that authority and autonomy over their own classes long before PBE came into vogue. And this all comes back to my core question. I would love for the board to please explain how and why we got here with PBE. What PBE-specific, peer-reviewed, evidence-based research exists to support this as a better system? Just saying the old way was old and needed to improve doesn't mean PBE is better. I'm all for improving things, continually. It just seems that every aspect of what a teacher does in the classroom and before and after hours and at home as they deal with the crazy amount of paperwork and grading and rubrics that they must keep up with for every child is now governed by PBE. And I'm still not hearing why that is, and more importantly, how we've seen that it actually helps kids. I'm tired of responses that start with, "we know it does," or "it makes sense that." Those are platitudes meant to shut down the conversation with concerned parents and are not supported by any research or facts. And please, no more, we've already put so much work, time, effort, money into this, and we can't turn back now. To me, that's a cop-out for not being willing to investigate if there is any benefit for our kids. To avoid admitting that no one here knows if this truly benefits our kids and that we might have implemented a solution that doesn't work. Continuing to do something that may not be working just because we've already been doing it is not an acceptable answer to me. It's certainly not something I could tell my employer. Continuing down an uncertain path just because we started doesn't make it right or the only answer. I'm asking the board to show us this is working. Show us that this has truly worked anywhere. I don't need research on RSU 5. I want to see any research at all. We haven't seen any. Arguing that we should continue down this path based on the empty reasons we've been given so far because someone making money selling PBE said we should and claims it's better doesn't end the questions. My kid has 8 more years in this system. I'd like to think he's getting a well-rounded education and he's enthusiastic about learning in and out of the classroom because his teachers are, and that they help infuse that in him. Because that's what will stick with him and help him in work and life. Not whether all of his teachers had time to check a box next to meets proficiency for however many hundreds of rubrics this system will use to label and rate him over the coming years. Education shouldn't be boiled down to a bunch of check boxes. Education anywhere is imperfect and imprecise. It's part of the beauty and the flaw in public education. It's not the same for everyone. No system can fix that or ensure that each kid gets exactly the same out of their educational experience as every other kid. Despite our current era and fascination with big data, more data does not necessarily equate to better data or better outcomes. And stripping teachers of what makes them unique and excited about teaching, just so we can try to reach an unattainable and somewhat meaningless goal of trying to label every kid as proficient in every aspect of learning, will do nothing to help teach our kids how to learn. I want a system that teaches kids how to learn. This system, as it is now, will teach them that checking a box is the ultimate goal. And I want more for my kid and for his education. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. 8, reports from the superintendent.
Thank you. In your package, you have the revised Board of Directors meeting schedule based upon our retreat. What we have done with that revision is ensured that we're going to have a meeting at each of our schools in the district, and we also put in another meeting for budget deliberation. So that's just a FYI on that. And then I am happy to report that the beginning of the year has gone very well. We have, as Cap pointed out, we've had some glitches with the transportation. We are working on that. Dennis met with the principals and myself yesterday, and we're doing some tweaks, and we're getting a lot closer to getting there on time and also leaving the school every day. So that is our goal, and I think I'll be able to, I think last year when I was looking back at the board kind of report on this date, I was saying, you know, we have a few glitches in transportation because every district I've been in, that is the thing that is probably the hardest to get right. We have software programs that help us with that, but inevitably we have new kids coming in at the last minute, and there's always some tweaks to be had. Compounding that problem is there is some road construction going on in Durham at the moment, so that's even presenting a couple of more barriers, but I'm hoping by the time I report out at our next board meeting that we'll have all that ironed out. Also at the next board meeting, the enrollment data I'll have very specific to the classes, but right now I can tell you that back in January we predicted that we'd have around 1977, and we've exceeded that, and I know that our enrollment's going to come in exceeding 2,000. So we still have people that are seeing RSU 5 as kind of the place to be to educate their students, and our enrollment just keeps climbing. So I'll have kind of a firmer numbers by our next meeting on that. I also wanted to mention that our strategic planning committee met today, and I wanted to start getting the word out about a community forum that we're having on Tuesday, October the 2nd, from 6:30 to 8:30 at Freeport High School. At that time, we're going to provide the data. We had more than 1,200 people respond to the survey. Our goal was to hit 1,000, so we're really excited about that. And what the people that attend that meeting will be doing is they'll be looking at that data and then identifying and analyzing the themes. And then we'll be taking that back as a committee to start to write the new strategic plan. So we really want all parents and community members and staff members to come out for that date. Again, that's October the 2nd at 6:30 at the high school. I also want to thank Jeff Zachow. He has donated the Snack Shack by giving his time and the materials, and I think that's up. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I hope you take a moment to kind of walk the track and field again and see that. That just, every time I'm out there, it just continues to astound me and make me really proud about the facility that we have there. And then our late-breaking good news is that we have 3 students from Freeport High School that have been announced as National Merit Scholarship semifinalists. There were 16,000 identified nationwide, and 3 of them are coming from Freeport High School, and that's Paul Biberstein, Alec Ames, and Margaret Parada. So we're really proud of those students for that accomplishment. And that's really just my brief report for tonight, and I'll have a more in-depth one at the next meeting. Sure.
Thanks, Becky. A question about the start and end of school. Is it correct that some of the schools are starting early this year? I'm confused about that. Which schools are starting early? Which ones are finishing
All of them are
later?
starting 10 minutes early, except for the high school, which is
middle school.
High school and middle school. Freeport Middle School are both staying 10 minutes later.
Okay, and everybody else is starting 10 minutes early and finishing.
At the
They're
same
finishing
time.
early. They're
No.
finishing later.
So
No,
we,
same
for the other levels, we added 5 minutes at the, I'm looking at Lisa because she's one of the elementary principals, and I think we added 5 minutes at the beginning of the day and then had them, no, they're going.
Durham is 10 minutes earlier.
10 minutes earlier except for Mass Landing, because they were trying to fix the Moore Street Mass Landing bus piece. So Emily went 5 on each end, but the rest of us all went 10.
Thank you.
Early.
That explains the confusion.
Right. So 3 schools are 10 minutes early, 1 school is 5 and 5, and 2 schools are 10 minutes later.
Okay.
Right? Is that right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, straight before
Yeah.
I answer any questions.
I think the message is that we have added 10 minutes to the student day
Yes.
in a variety of ways to make the busing work.
Okay.
And we don't quite have it perfect yet.
Okay. Thank you.
So do you want to jump into your?
I
yeah,
do.
okay.
So I apologize for this adjustment to the agenda, but it really is late breaking, and that's why it's on here, and it's time sensitive. So we currently have a position open for data specialist, project manager. Sherry Williams resigned. I think I had reported that to the board in a board update this summer. And so what we have currently in RSU 5 is that all of our employees either contribute to one of two retirement systems. They either contribute to main PERS or to Social Security. If you're a teacher or an ed tech, there's no choice. Throughout the state, all teachers and all ed techs and any administrator that was previously a teacher or an ed tech, that they have to contribute to the main PERS. Then all other groups, such as custodians, food service, nutrition, and then like our tech people, depending on what district you're in, you could be contributing to Social Security, or you might have the option of contributing to main PERS. In RSU 5, when the RSU was formed, the board at that time decided to grandfather some employees out at Durham that were under the main PERS. And so up until this point, those are the only other employees, other than the teachers and the ed techs and some administrators, that contributed to the main PERS. Everybody else in RSU 5 contributes to Social Security. So what we have at this moment that I'm requesting is I have a candidate. Our top candidate is currently in another district and is contributing to main PERS, and that person would like to continue with that. And so I have researched this with the state, with Michelle Lichtai, and also with our legal counsel. And because it's kind of a unique position, it can be in its own group, and that person, this position could be added to the main PERS. So I'm recommending to the board that we put this position into the main PERS system. Yeah.
I just have a question because I'm reading your memo as you were speaking and wondering, main PERS and PLD, are you using those interchangeably?
I am. So when you're a custodian or food service or the data specialist, they call that the, I always want to call it the professional learning day, right? So every time I have to look at this, it's just called participating local districts. And we currently have that for these employees at Durham, the two that have been grandfathered. So this position would also go under that. Not in the same group, but under what the state refers to as a participating local district.
So if we allow this to happen now, will there be an effect where we'll see a great number of people who want to do this too and will want to change? Are we establishing a precedent that we don't want to establish?
Well, so we already have it for those two people at Durham. I don't expect that to happen because most other positions have multiple people in them. And there are a lot of people who want to stay with their Social Security. And so what we learned over the past day is that if it's a whole group, then the whole group has to go. And so I don't see that happening. So for example, if we had one administrator that said, we want all administrators in that, then the whole group would have to agree to that. I don't think you're going to see that happen. Or like all food service people, right? Because a lot of them are nearing, or with any group, you have a variety of people and some are nearing retirement. And I just don't think you would see that.
Maddie?
So, two questions. One was similar. Could this be seen as a distinct financial advantage over this person's new peers? It sounds like you're saying you don't think so.
I think
Well,
there is no new pairs. This is an individual
This is the
position.
problem. There's not a group.
Okay.
Right. I mean, there is a group. It's a group of one, is how the state
Right.
sees it. But there aren't peers in there, or that would be a problem.
And-
Now, I will say that, for example, in Portland, they have theirs set up in a way that new employees can opt into either one. But I'm not recommending that. I'm just explaining how, it's
that's
done
not
as
how ours
different
is
places.
set up.
That's not how ours is
And
set
you're
up.
not concerned that we could be setting a precedent that will be difficult to manage
I'm
going
not.
forward? Okay. And I'm presuming this person has requested it because they would be at a financial disadvantage if they had to change?
Correct.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
So you need the motion?
I'm
Did
looking
I
for the
give it?
motion.
I thought I gave it.
Okay, yep. I think you took it back.
Is this an added cost, or like what is why do we push people towards main PERS?
We don't. We do most people who are in the Social Security, not main PERS.
And we don't do the PL. Why do we prefer people to contribute to Social Security over the PLD? Does it cost us money to manage it or something?
Seems like a Michelle question.
Well, so I think it's something you determined when you came together, and so I don't know that. So there is about a 2% increase for the main PERS over Social Security. Is that correct, Michelle? And I considered that in my offer.
Would you like to make a motion, Lindsay?
I'd like to make a motion. Is it this paragraph?
Yeah. Mike?
Mike, I'd like to make a motion to create a new group to participate in the RSU's PLD plan under main PERS, which group shall include the position of Data Specialist Project Manager. Participation of the Data Specialist Project Manager in the plan shall be effective as of September 12th, 2018.
Yep, she did. Good, okay.
A second.
Second. Administrator reports. We don't have any on here, so I think we're good. Board comments and committee reports. We don't have any specific committee reports yet because I think committees are just kicking off for the new season. The new season, the new year.
Sports team.
Or TV, yeah. But this is also the place on the agenda if we have board members that had any information sharing they wanted to do, or so we'll open that up for folks. Kate?
I have one piece that I'm hoping that I'll be able to bring to the policy committee, but I just wanted to let the board know. I have had a question about how the RSU provides access to like our email lists for, say, like our parent-teacher groups and other groups that raise money to benefit RSU 5 solely, like the Freeport Pownell Durham Education Foundation. I think that this is not the only group that has ever brought it to my attention that there's some sort of roadblock there for these groups to be able to access parents that would probably very willingly donate or attend their events or support their group. And so one of the things I'm hoping that we can do is look into how maybe if it's a policy thing, we might be able to get around that barrier. I think it has to do with some of it is privacy laws, but so just want to let the board know.
Or what people are opting into when they provide their email at the beginning of the year. All right. Anything else? Okay. Policy review also doesn't have any items under there yet. I'm sure Cynthia will fill that up quickly once the policy committee gets rolling. So we'll move on to 12 unfinished business, and we'll start with the workshop on proficiency-based education.
Exactly. Who was that? Somebody. Okay, good evening, everyone. It seems like we were just here doing this, but it was like, I guess, April 11th. So we're happy to be back here to talk more about what our grading and reporting practices are at Freeport High School. We started the year off this year talking about teaching and learning not only at Freeport High School, but also in RSU 5. And on the first day, and we talked about we really want to go for the gold and help all of our students achieve. So I just wanted to start out, and I think really everyone knows this, but I thought I'd try to be as clear as possible about this, because I know that previously there was some confusion about what is required under the statute versus what isn't. With the current amendment to the proficiency-based statute, everything is now really left up to local control. So if as a district we decide we don't want to do anything that's proficiency-based, that is our option. So I think what we now really have to do as administrators and teachers and the board is to decide what is going to improve student achievement overall, because that is our overarching board goal, is to continue to see progress in that area. This is a slide that I just wanted to review from April. We do believe that this is what is the current best thinking in education right now, that it is important, and I think we're getting really positive feedback about separating out what do I really know in math versus, how prepared do I come to math class. And so we want to continue with the separation of the content from the habits of work. We think that it's much easier to hit the target when you know what the target is, and that is been going on in education for quite a while now. You've heard it referred to as standards-based education, competency-based education, proficiency-based education. All of those are grounded in you need to have clear targets or standards. Then once you kind of know what the standard is, we really want kids to be clear about how do you hit that? What does it mean to be successful? We heard Cap say tonight that her kids are coming home reporting there's not a pathway to the 4 on the how. We don't want that being the message. We want every student to be able to articulate for themselves, how do I get a 4? Or what is a 3? What does that success look like? In order for them to be able to move to the next level, I think we see this in sports more than we do in academics sometimes. Coaches are providing very specific feedback about, how can I get better about protecting the goal and not having the other team score against us. The same is true in academics. Just in case you didn't know, we tied Yarmouth in boys soccer, and we kind of broke their winning streak. I think that had like 26 games that they had won in a row. And so I think that our team has been given by their coach some very specific feedback for us to reach that milestone. So we're trying to do that. Not only are we trying to do that for students, we're doing it in all of our departments this year. I'm trying to provide specific feedback to administrators, whether it's in a school or in the nutrition. We're trying to be very specific in our feedback. We recognize that not all students learn at the same rate and in the same way, so we think it's really important to give various amounts of time and multiple pathways to reach those standards. And we do believe that it's very, very important to allow students to reassess, and even our staff to reassess when they don't hit the target the first time. We want to provide more feedback, more practice, and then we want to come back and reassess on those standards. I have encouraged the staff on the first day to really think about, shift their thinking from it's not that you taught it, it really is what is the impact on your teaching and did our students learn it. So it's not just opening up something and pouring it in, but it's really what's growing from your teaching. So these are really the 3 questions that we're working on in all of our departments, at the high school, at the K-8 level, and in all departments. What does success look like? Where are we? Where is that person relative to success? And that's where you get into very clear criteria so that students can identify where they are. And then what are our next steps to get us closer to achieving not only proficiency, but beyond. We want all of our students, when possible, getting those 4s that Cap's talking about. And we think by doing that we really can get all of our students achieving and improving student learning across the district.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jen Golko, principal of the high school. I know that some of you were able to attend the information session that we held for community and families. So some of this information you will have already seen, except we're going to go into greater depth tonight and into more detail. And our goal is to talk about our philosophy of our instructional practices, to get into more specifics and share how we are moving forward, how we've revised our grading and reporting practices, and also to answer questions that you may have about our grading and reporting practices. We have 3 of our wonderful teachers here with us tonight. Margie Chalmers, who's the chair of our ELA department, Jay Thomas, who's the chair of our math department, and Tracy Pandora, who's the chair of our special education department. So the 3 of them, along with Charlie Mellon, are going to speak tonight about how we're moving forward at the high school. So a couple of years ago, as all of you on the board know, we are about to head into our accreditation visit from NEASC, and part of that whole process, which is a 2-year process, is to re-examine and potentially revise our core values and beliefs, what drives our school in terms of everything that we do, from social emotional support, academic support, and how we exist as a culture. And we really believe that we are a learner-centered environment where we are pushing student achievement in every way that we can, and also supporting our students and our teachers on the path to get there. We feel that pushing our students to be critical thinkers and effective communicators and problem solvers is not going to just help them in high school, but far beyond in college and career. And so no matter what we do for our instructional practices, for programs that we implement, we are always trying to come back to our core values, that this is what we are trying to do and instill in our students. And our goal is to really provide students with meaningful opportunities to push their level of complex thinking, higher level of thinking. We really are constantly talking about how we are preparing our students for life in and beyond high school. And that phrase of ever-changing career world, I'm sure all of you have heard before, that we are preparing kids for careers that don't even exist yet. And that's something that is part of our reality for how we are supporting our students. You know, one thing that I've shared with some teachers and some of our administrators is that I think a great example of this is something I heard at a math workshop a couple of years ago, where it just, to me, really resonated about how things have changed in the way that we're teaching our students. Is that 20 years ago or 25 years ago, if you were a person who could take a whole bunch of data, numbers and put them into an organized fashion in a way that they could quickly compute something, you are worth $1 million. This is what the speaker said at the workshop. And then now we have Excel. And so now in today's world, with Excel, you need to be the person who can look at 5 different spreadsheets on 5 different types of data and look at patterns and trends and analyze those. And that is a different kind of thinking. And that's our reality. That's what we think about when we are trying to focus on how we are preparing our kids for the changing world. So with that, I'm going to shift to Charlie Millen's going to talk a little bit about how we have come to our decisions, and then our teachers will speak after him.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Charlie Millen, the assistant principal at the high school. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of an overall look at the shifts and how we got to where we are today at the high school. And then the teachers are going to come through and talk about some specific practices that you'll hear about. So as you guys know, last year was our first full year of implementation of the kind of proficiency-based practices. The last year's freshmen were scored 1 to 4, and we implemented a lot of the new proficiency-based practices. Throughout the year, we gathered feedback about the benefits and the challenges to the practices. It was clear after gathering that feedback that there was a clear desire for a system that gave more meaningful feedback to students, was more manageable for our teachers, and understandable for our parents. So that's what we got to, and we talked a little bit about that at our at that April 11th workshop in Pownell. So given that feedback that we got and how we spent our spring, we decided that there was some clearly there were some things that were working well, and then there were some things that weren't working well. So we decided that we wanted to try to create a system that kind of brought those things together, that brought the proficiency-based practices that were working with some of the things that weren't working. So we kind of looked at what we were doing, and we decided we wanted to keep high standards for students, those clear targets. We wanted to make sure that students understood the expectations for academic growth and success. We wanted to make sure we created a system where there was frequent feedback given to students, and we wanted to give students the opportunity to demonstrate some of those complex thinking skills that Jen was just talking about, and we wanted to keep the idea that we were going to separate habits of work from the academic skills and knowledge. Then we also looked at what wasn't working so well, and the 1 to 4 was not understandable for parents, not manageable for teachers, and so we wanted to make sure that. So we decided to change that, and we went back to the 0 to 100 scale. And so to kind of walk you through some of those things, we're going to call up some of our teachers here who are living in this and implementing this, and so Jay is going to talk a little bit about some of the process and lead into some of the practices. In your packets, you have the kind of the principles and practices. It looks like it's a yellow sheet there, and you'll see that they're numbered 1 through 7. After Jay gets into the kind of the process a little bit, we'll start working our way through those 7 different practices, and they'll kind of walk you through that. And then Jen and I will come back at the end, and we'll answer any questions that you guys might have about it, okay? So, Jay Thomas.
Hi there. Jay Thomas, math teacher at the high school. So, yes, we were getting feedback from all sources as we started that school year. In fact, we started the year before and went for a quarter of the year, I think, and said, wait a minute, we need to take a time out and really revisit this. But again, we thought we had it figured out mostly, and we started down the path. It seemed like things were falling apart, getting feedback from all of our stakeholders, and at that point we knew that the teachers are the ones in the classroom, And we needed to make sure that we had, there's however many of us, 40 of us here or so in the building, and we got together and started to discuss what were some of the other options that we could do here that would make sense for everyone. Because as we all know, there can be, depending on how you go into this, a lot of data that starts to take place and has to be recorded, and the grading thing all of a sudden where before I might enter an 85 for a math test, now I might have to enter 2 3s and a 4 because I had to go and grade on different standards. And it was just there was a lot more data and paperwork that was going on there. Now, I think the flip side of it, though, for me was that we were able to go and let students know that maybe in this area you're doing great and in this space you weren't, which is the kind of feedback they really weren't getting before. So, and some kids I think could understood what was going on with that, and it can be, potentially there's a lot of good feedback there. So as we went along, we got all the teachers together and we met, we have professional learning communities where we meet in groups every other day. And while, yes, there was some time spent with NEAS, we were able to go in and start to address this topic. So by the end of the year, we had, people had a chance to start processing this. And then we have a leadership team at the high school where there's 8 or so people on this team, and over the summer we have a retreat. So we spent a good part of our retreat discussing this grading practices, and we sat down and thought about it, and then we settled on what we thought might be a good new plan where, again, we're back to the 0 to 100 thing that seems like everybody is pretty much used to. And at that point, we got this plan pretty much organized. And at the end of the summer, we have another retreat where we actually bring in the department heads as well. And we got together and discussed with them how we were going to present this to the faculty on our pre-teacher days before school started. So at that point, I guess we're ready to move forward.
Oh, it's on here, sorry. Hi, I'm Margie Chalmers, and I'm from the English department. And so I'm going to just talk about the first 2 principles on this new policy. You'll notice that a lot of it's actually not new. It's just a new document that reiterates some of our old ideas with some of the new ones. The first principle is the idea that all courses are going to be aligned to state or national standards by content area, and that's all work that we have done over the past several years, or was even done prior to that. And so we're continuing to have the standards and then specific indicators underneath each standard. And then the second principle is that all departments are going to use common scoring criteria for assessments, and that the criteria comes from the content standards or indicators. Our scoring criteria at the indicator level. And that students can have the ability to earn reassessment opportunities on summatives. And so in the English department, as well as many of the other departments, we're continuing to use the scoring criteria the same way that we did last year and even the years prior to that. When we hand out an essay assignment or a summative assignment to the students, we have scoring criteria attached to them. It's at the indicator level, so they know which indicators they're going to be scored on, and they can see clearly from the rubrics what's expected of them and what the criteria is for the different categories. It also allows us to, we use those same scoring criteria to give them feedback. So it sets expectations for them. It allows us to give them specific feedback, even by circling in different categories on the scoring rubrics. And then finally, as teachers, it allows for us to sort of calibrate among ourselves of, on this assignment for a class of juniors, how does, what does a proficient essay or a proficient reading score look like? And so those are the 3 probably most significant ways that we're using the scoring criteria.
And I guess from a math point of view, I would just also add that, yes, I don't know if anyone's ever looked at the Common Core national standards. There are, under math, there are an unbelievable number of standards there. It would just be impossible for us to go. It's so much data. We all would need an assistant data person in our classrooms to make that all happen. In the math department, we went and just boiled them down to, we have 5 simple standards which we work with. So it's a lot more manageable. And again, we're thinking about what we want as teachers to have students leave Freeport High School with for skills, is really, and abilities there. And actually, we have some. I don't know if we want to show these examples of our. Okay, so I'll do my algebra one since I'm here. And let's see if I can make this large. And maybe larger. So when I go and give out a exam or a summative test for students, I actually don't print the scoring criteria on it because we've basically covered these things as we've gone through the unit. Again, I'm trying to save a couple of trees here. But when I go to hand it back, I give them a copy of this scoring criteria where I will put notes on that and give them feedback. And the nice thing about this is, again, in the past, I would often just go and put an 85 on a test. Now I'm actually giving them some feedback on a couple of these things. The other piece that I give them as well on the same piece of paper that's stapled to their test is I have their reassessment form on the back side. And we have a policy at this high school where you have 72 hours to get back in touch with the teacher if you want to have a reassessment, and then you have 2 weeks to follow through on whatever your plan is for this reassessment. Lots of times the students are coming in unprepared for a test because, maybe they didn't do all their homework. And so they need to settle in, and I would put on here, need to complete these certain assignments. I also might assign some other problems that they need to do before they are eligible for reassessment. So again, we're trying to set them up because I think our bottom line here is, especially when I'm working with Algebra 1 kids, they can't do pre-calculus if they can't graph lines. And if they're not doing the line thing and getting it sorted out now, they're not going to find success in the future. So I think, as I would hope that parents too are going and watching what's going on here, because sometimes our freshmen need some help going and settling in and getting their work done. Because I know at times we have parents that think their son or daughter might want to be in like an AP calculus course, but as a freshman, if you can't graph a line, you're not headed in that direction. So you really need to go and buckle down. And right now we're actually working a little bit harder with the math committee to go and figure out our pathways for math from middle school to high school. So we're hoping that parents will be part of our plan here, and kids will go and, if you have plans for your child to go and do really well in math or be a strong math student, they really need to start in middle school. So when they get to the high school, they're ready to go. So that's how we do it in math, and kids have a chance to reassess. And then yours.
Yeah, so this is an example from a To Kill a Mockingbird assignment, and it was basically a character analysis reflection, but you can see some of the ways that we adapt the scoring criteria. So this is coming from this common scoring criteria that we're all using, but we also have provided a checklist that sort of lets them follow the steps to help them get through the assignment as well. So, and I think that we do that a lot where it's this, even though it's a common scoring criteria, it looks it's attached to very different assignments. And so we still do a wide variety of assignments, and we're constantly adding other pieces to the assignments, so they do look different, but we're still measuring an underlying common skill that we want our students to be able to do really well. In English, the same indicators recycle over and over and over again, but it's with a different book or a different genre or a different kind of nonfiction text, etc. So these are some of the ways that we adapt a similar indicator and use it for a wide variety of assignments. And there's almost always a description as well as the criteria underneath it that the students become pretty familiar with. Okay. So I think we're back
Sorry.
Sorry, Tracy. Okay. One of the other things that we felt was really important was that we separated our habits of work from our academic course grades. Believe it or not, I chuckled when we decided that this was something that we were going to work with, because in 1987, when I was working at a boarding school in Connecticut, we did this. And it was a small boarding school, and what it did, it gave kids a chance to go and, I work really hard in class, but I'm kind of struggling a little bit with the content, and they could get A's in their habits of work, or now will be whatever, 90s or something like that in habits of work, and then they might not have done as well with the course content. And it also let the student, the parents, everyone that looks at the grades know, if I'm not doing my homework, your habits of work grade might not be so great, and it's a flag that maybe we need to get to work here. So I think that it makes a lot of sense to go and separate these so kids can go and have that chance. Now, I'm not sure if I handed in a piece of work 2 weeks late and it was really nice, whether you'd be able to get a distinguished grade on that, because really to get that distinguished grade, it probably needs to be handed in on time. That's one of those things that we need to go and work out, but it makes a difference. I think distinguished work and then not necessarily handing in on time, there's a little bit of an issue there, because you need to work on habits of work. And actually, I think a lot of the habits of work things are things that we take away and carry into our work life later in life. Showing up on time to things, passing things in on time. I've had businesses before where I fired kids a couple times because they were late or something like that, and it's those are lessons that you can learn in high school, handing things in on time. Who's next?
Okay. I feel like this is sort of the hot button topic here. I remember standing and talking at the board meeting in April, and we were trying to explain why some of us, not all of us to be clear, but some people preferred going back to this range in this grading scale. And so here it is, the grading scale that offers the range for beginning, developing, proficient, and distinguished. And so we still have all the scoring criteria the same way we did before. We have these words that have come from the district to describe them, and then we have these assigned ranges of scores that we can give within each one. So I remember explaining back then that I felt like sometimes there wasn't enough flexibility within like a 3 category. A lot of students were getting a 3, but there seemed to be a really wide range of 3s. Even a 3 and a 3.5 didn't feel like there was enough flexibility for some of my assignments. Sometimes assignments just fall neatly and I'm really only giving it a median, like a middle of, just a straight down the line proficient or distinguished. But there are other assignments, especially with writing, where the rubric itself, it's one indicator, but there are 5 or 6 domains under that indicator. And so students really may be all over the rubric, all over the map. And so to have a little bit more nuance in those assignments, to be able to distinguish a very high proficient but not yet distinguished, or a really high developing score, is a lot more nice to be able to give a student than just a straight up developing score. So I think the nuances in some cases are really meaningful for teachers to be able to give. And teachers don't have to. They can still use a mid-range score if they want to. But what this is providing us, the way it's written, is that we just have flexibility. So some teachers could still give sort of median scores, but it will average to a more accurate score in the end. Or you could be giving more fine-tuned scores as you're going along. And so this new system is not only, more probably friendlier and more common for people to understand, parents and students and teachers alike. But I really appreciate the flexibility that it gives for a lot of the assignments that I'm doing in my class.
I'm Tracy Pandora. As many of you know, I teach special education here, and as some of you know, I'm also a parent of a recent high school graduate and also of a current sophomore. I was part of the Habits of Work committee that met this summer with my colleagues of different disciplines, and I was particularly interested in this because I have a 10th grader who I can tell you is not at home right now wringing his hands over how he can get a 4. So I want to know how I can coach him in getting a 4, or a 3 would be nice. And so the whole point of this Habits of Work is really to help kids take ownership of their learning and for teachers to help support them in that, in their academic growth and in their interpersonal growth. And it's a lot of what teachers have been doing all along and kind of rolling into their overall grade anyway as a citizenship grade or an effort grade. And so part of our task on this committee was to really make it observable and measurable, which is, I keep thinking of it in my special education mind, that's what we need to do when we write IEP goals. We have to have a present level, and it has to be very specific so that everyone understands what kind of growth we're making and the student is making. And so it allows the teacher to explicitly teach that to the student and conference with the student around what's working and what's not working. And so, so with the rubric, the sticking point, I think, with the previous rubric we were using was that determination piece. And as a parent, I even struggled with that. Like, what is that? Like the teacher's pet grade? Like, how do you get determination? How do you show, I tell Will, like, bite your pencil, look, make a face or something, like, look determined. So we had to make that more measurable and more observable, something that could be very specific. So the 3 domains are preparedness, engagement, and overall work ethic. Passing your things in on time, coming to class on time, that kind of thing. We also left room for teachers, to Cap's point, to specify what that looks like in each specific class. So in Miss Chalmers' English class, getting a 3 looks like this, getting a 4 looks like this. So students and parents can see specifically what they do need to do to get that 4. And so teachers will be grading or observing and taking data on this every 2 weeks in their classes or so on their students. So again, as people have said, wanted to make it manageable for teachers, understandable for students and parents. Anything else? Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Okay, so the last 2 items on the last 2 principles, 6 and 7, I'm going to kind of walk through a little bit, and then Jen's going to come back up and talk about kind of our next steps and where we go from here. So number 6 is really about how we want to determine promotion onto the next level, if you will. And prior to the 1 to 4 system at Freeport High School, promotion to be promoted to the next level, you would have to get a 70. And one of the kind of benefits we saw of the proficiency system was how it raises the bar. And so we wanted to, but on the other hand, a lot of the feedback we got last year was we might have kind of raised the bar a little too far for some students and some families. And so when we thought about that this summer with our teachers, we decided that we would make 76 the point at which a student can move on to the next level at Freeport High School without support. And then from there are varying levels of how they would move on with or without support. So 76 and higher, you move on without support. If you finish the year on an average of the academic standards, so not the habits of work standards, just the academic standards, if you get between a 70 and 75, you move on, but you'll have support the next year. So you might be in a skills class, a literacy class, a math support class, something like that. If you finish between a 60 and 69, then you'd be eligible to make the credit up at summer school and also move on with support the next year. And if you finish between a 60 or below, you would not get credit at Freeport High School and would have to repeat the course and the standards. So that's kind of the way we determine promotion. And then the next one, number 7, we also felt it's important to recognize students for both excellence in academic skills and knowledge, as well as the habits of work skills. So the honor roll used to be at our school at 85 to get on honor roll. We lowered that by 2 points to an 83 to get on a roll, just to match, to align with our grade scale, the new grade scale that we have. But keep in mind that we've also increased the rigor by making a 76 the number to get to move on to the next course. And then we also we also want to recognize students for their habits of work as well. So we will have this habits of work recognition that kind of follows along those same two scales. So that's how we want to recognize students for both academic skills as well as habits of work. And now Jen is going to talk about next steps.
So in our work for the current school year, one thing that we know is on our plate for what we are looking at with our leadership team, with our guidance department and our registrar, is what our transcript will look like for our current 9th and 10th graders. They have some time, clearly, before they are submitting that transcript to colleges, though sometimes different programs or scholarships might ask for a transcript, and we want to be making sure that we're ahead of the game and looking at what the transcript will look like. Our thought right now is it will look very similar to our current transcript, although habits of work will be reported on there. One of the things, if you remember, I visited Brown University last year and came back, shared some of what their head of admissions had said, and from his perspective, which of course is only one school, he thought it was incredibly important to see a student's habits of work on their transcript to recognize what they had done in that area in their career. The second thing is always, every single year, we revise our school profile to make sure that it's the most accurate document. That is the piece that goes to every college for every student that they apply to, because every school across the country has different ways that they handle grading, reporting, honors recognition. Our school profile is what lets schools know what our system is here, and so it helps colleges to interpret a student's transcript. And then finally, continuous reflection and revision of our instructional practices. That's nothing new. We do that all year, every year, thinking about what is going to serve our students best, and thinking about what is current research. A lot of what we look at is brain research. How do kids learn best? And that's what we are using as some of our practices, some of the basis for our practices, as well as examining across the country and across the state what other schools are doing. One thing that we keep in mind, too, is looking at our data. When it's my turn to come and report my board goals, I'll be very happy to report that we've seen an increase in 9th grade NWEA, 10th grade NWEA, the SAT, and the Science MEA this year. We're incredibly proud of that. And I think a large part of that is the work that our teachers have done in examining all of their instructional practices. But with that said, we have a lot of room for growth in our data. We know that. And so we want to continue to reflect and revise our practices so that we are serving our students the best that we possibly can. I want to say thank you to our teachers for coming tonight. It's been a long week. They had an open house this week, too. So thank you very much. And we'd like to open it up for questions, either for Charlie, for me, or for our teachers.
Candy.
Oh, thank you. This really is, I have two questions, actually. And one is really kind of for the teachers. And this is the old lady talking here who has a bunch of retired teacher friends and who have said, and I'm asking, have you found all of this work that this means for you, all of the grading and reporting and everything? Have you found at all that it has interfered with, I hesitate to use the word creativity, but your lesson plans, the things you plan to do with kids, has that been a problem at all?
Yes. Jay Thomas.
Okay.
Math. So anyway, with math, I think it's, we all are always thinking about our practice, and it's made me rethink my practice.
Okay.
And I think it's not a bad thing. It's been some work, but I think it's better if it's better for me, and I think it's better for the students.
Okay.
Because I'm doing things like checklists now, because I know what kids need to learn before they can move from my algebra class to a pre-calculus class. So, and I'm, as I go through the school year, I'm thinking about those things now and what these students need to know moving forward. And we have this great new math curriculum, thanks to you all,
Right.
which is going, I think we're going to start seeing some growth from that. We're right at the end of having kids going into one of these math classes that have not been part of the program. So it's our last year. Now, from going forward after this year, everyone will have been in this Big Ideas program now. So I think we're looking forward to them used to this curriculum, because they're going to come right from 8th grade into 9th grade using this book. So, I think as far as that all goes, yeah, I've had to rethink some stuff, but I think it's all okay. I think this year's change in the grading is a big help. As much as we have this technology piece now, and I'm learning things like split screens, and I have Big Ideas on one side and my grade book on the other, and I can actually go right through that grading pretty fast.
Okay.
Learning some tricks, even the old guy.
Okay. Oh.
And I think it's very similar for English. I don't think in English it was a drastic change to start using standards and scoring criteria. But the same as Jay, there are definitely some assignments that I have to think why am I doing this assignment? And then I still feel like there's plenty of room to to make my own decision on it. It's sort of a good test is, for an example that comes to mind, if we're going to have the kids do a visual of something that they've read, there's no scoring criteria for the visual that they're doing with it. So I either need to decide, is that how they should be spending their time? And sometimes it is. Sometimes that's exactly what I want them to do. So maybe I just tweak it, and now they have to add explanations to why, or they have to do a written piece along with that visual. So I don't throw the visual out. In some ways, it's made the assignment more legitimate and given, a better assignment. Or sometimes we're doing a quick thing and it's not something that I score, but I turn it into a quick thing instead of spending a whole class period on it, because it's not actually as meaningful. So it does change a little bit of what we do, and we're reviewing it, but the more concrete changes are things like adding a lot more nonfiction instead of just fiction, and those are bigger decisions that I think, nationally people are making and stuff. So I think there's some change, but it's probably definitely more good than thwarting creativity.
Okay, thank you. And my other question had to do with special ed, and really kind of wondering what you're seeing as how you're, intertwining IEPs and the standards and that kind of thing.
Well, we have had to receive some training and, how to write our IEP goals around the standards.
Yeah.
So that's been that's been a change, and that's taken some training and some getting used to. As far as the habits of work, we've been doing that forever.
Sure.
We invented habits of work. That's what we, so we've always been doing that. And, I'm almost glad to see that happening now across the board, to help really explicitly teach those skills. So, to be honest, there's some concern about students who will cognitively be very challenged to meet those standards. But, we're receiving training and figuring out how we can do that based on their area of disability. Does that answer?
Just a follow-up to that point. So are the teachers giving the students guidance on how to meet the standards?
Yes, and really where that comes into play is then you have to be really have really tight accommodations and modifications that don't necessarily change the curriculum or the standard, but help them reach it. You start where the student is and help them to reach that, meet that standard at their level of ability, if that makes sense. So that's where that comes into play, I think, is when we're writing our accommodations and our modifications. If maybe the length and breadth of the assignment needs to be modified, but it's still meeting the same targets, hitting the same standard, but maybe not to the complexity as a student without a disability might need to meet that standard. Does that make sense? And it's a learning curve for us, for sure.
Kate.
I had a question about the scoring criteria, and I'm just wondering now, is the for example, the ELA 9 standard 1 that you provide, are we saying like this is what you measure the students' work on, and you don't have any, like, you don't get down into the weeds with the indicators anymore, or are those still there?
So teachers are giving students feedback by indicator. So really, that kind of real descriptive, specific feedback. But they're not entering at that level anymore. They're entering at the standard level. So our whole thought behind that, and we had a lot of discussion of this, is that we want kids to get really specific feedback. But Power School might not necessarily be the place for that. Power School is going to be a more holistic view of how they're doing on that standard, where a student's going to get the scoring criteria back, have a conversation with teachers. Lots of teachers have implemented students doing self-assessments, looking at the scoring criteria, the work that they got back, the score that they got from their teacher, and think about what's next for me. But so that level last year that was really cumbersome in Power School is what we've taken out.
So what parents will be looking for, rather than looking in at their either the report card, or if you have kids in middle school or high school going into Power School and seeing as their grades get entered, you're looking as a parent for that sheet of paper that comes back with the assessment, and that'll have kind of where the student needs.
I would say both. I would say both. I mean, parents still definitely are going to get lots of information from Power School. It's just that Power School is going to show an average of, if Margie Chalmers has asked a student to determine the central theme of a text multiple times, the score in Power School is going to show, how students have been doing on that over time, because it's an average up to the standard level, if that makes sense. It's harder to explain than it is to show. If we have Tracy Pandora's son, maybe when he has more grades, she can project his grades. But it's much easier to explain that when you're looking at the actual student grades that are in Power School. But I still think, absolutely, when students go home, parents should be asking, how did it go? Do you have the scoring criteria? What kind of feedback did you get? Those are three great questions to ask, as well as looking in Power School and how they're doing over time.
I just had a question about how I remember that last year it was discussed that the freshmen's grades were going to get reverted into a numerical grade for the, and I don't know if I missed it in emails or in the packet. Like how did that go? Because I'm assuming I didn't have a ninth grader last year, but I'm assuming that was kind of a big deal.
I would say yes and no, but we had a conversion chart that went out. Teachers gave feedback on that went out before any parents got their end of year report card. The conversion scale went out, and then we actually did the conversion on every student's report card, and then sent them to parents over at the end of June. And there were a couple of questions where there was a calculation error. Other than fixing those, we didn't hear any feedback from that. Lots of questions of like, when do I get my laptop?
The second part of that question, the flip side, is if you had students, because I also remember there was issue with having, freshmen and sophomores in classes last year. So was there any look at like the grading and how it compared? So if, I'll use my own kid as an example. She was a sophomore last year in a class with freshmen as well, and so they were graded separately. She was graded numerically, and the freshmen were graded 1 to 4. So did that conversion chart like match up in every class?
And that's why we got feedback from teachers. That's what we were trying to do, to have them have a similar scale when it went to the 100-point scale. And I think the input that teachers gave on that scale was they felt that it was.
And was it like kind of parallel to the one that exists now?
Similar, yeah.
Okay. I'm surprised there wasn't more feedback from that. That seemed like a big deal last year.
I don't think I have a question. I have a comment. Okay. Is that allowed? questions and answers. Oh.
Are you going to provide the answer and we'll come up with a question?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to express my extreme deep gratitude and thanks to all the administrators and staff. I know you guys were feverishly working on this all year last year, and then, well into throughout the whole summer with a substantial amount of work. And it's really deeply moving to me how you listened to all the stakeholders in the community and actually dug in and figured out ways to take the best of things that were working and then get rid of the stuff that wasn't and adapt it to work for teachers and students. And I mean, I have a list of 10 things here that it's this was the problem, this was the ultimate, decided solution going into this year. And that's just it gives me the chills how that evolution happened. I'm also aware that there are still, outstanding things to be worked out. But I just wanted to say thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Sorry, but I'm going back to mundane questions here. And then I have a thank you too. But I wanted to ask, what is the support system for how? And what are the consequences for students who are continually failing how? I mean, obviously they can advance to the next grade, so there's really no consequence there to having really poor habits of work. But also for the students who are incapable of developing good habits of work on their own, what kind of support system is there in place?
I think there always has been. When I started my teaching career and I had a participation portion of my grade, I used to put a graph on the board that showed students with high participation and effort grades tended to have higher assessment grades because they were doing their homework, they were engaged in class, they were participating in discussions. So I think that's the consequence that kids can easily see. If they, I've made the comment to kids all the time, as a football lover, I would hope the Patriots are practicing before a game, because if they just showed up, we can guarantee on Sunday they're not going to play that well. And so I think kids, when they're having conversations with teachers, and there's lots of conversations happening about habits of work, particularly this year, if you saw in the rubric, there's a blank space where the expectation is that teachers are talking about, in my class, this looks like for a 1, 2, 3, and a 4. And so I think that that kids will see that kind of natural consequence in terms of, and we don't want to talk about it as consequence. Will Piddon says a lot. It's about habits. It's about building good habits so that they have them in their life, in their work, and school. That students won't be recognized for honor roll. They're going to have challenges with eligibility. You'll notice that the eligibility score requirement is higher for habits of work. The thought behind that is it's okay to be really struggling in chemistry. It's not okay to not put forth your best effort if you're going to also be an athlete. Just saying you don't have time. You need to put more time into your academics. So I think kids can see the consequence. Certainly something we can encourage teachers to say, hey, look at these high habits of work scores and look at how these students are improving. It's not an exact correlation, but oftentimes it is. In terms of kids, your question was in terms of kids who really struggle to meet those. So we actually, one of the things that I worked with the two principals of the middle schools, with Will and with Ray, was identifying that a lot of our students who were coming into the 9th grade didn't have as many struggles with actual holes in their literacy skills or their math skills. It was their executive function, their work habit skills. So we have 2 new classes, 2 sections of each. So it's called Humanities Skills for 9th and 10th graders and Math Support for 9th and 10th graders. And it's really focused on work habits. It's a 40-minute class. There's a special ed teacher in the humanities class who's giving a quick 10-minute lesson on executive function. listening skills, organization, time management, and then direct support for whatever they're doing in their humanities, English, and social studies class. We don't have that right now for 11th and 12th graders. We have their schedules are different. We have different kinds of support for them, like our learning lab. But so we're trying to recognize that that's a need and give kids direct support who need it.
So do all the kids participate in that class that you described, the ELA support skills?
No, that's it's not optional. Kids don't decide to go in there. We decide, and it's by recommendation from the middle school staff and from our staff and from guidance of who we think is best fit, and we're trying to keep those classes small. So there are under 12 students in each of those sections.
One more question, and this is about the relearn and retake. How do teachers determine what is an initial good faith effort? It seems a little ambiguous, and that it could be a lot of variation between one teacher and another. Not that they shouldn't have the discretion, but as a parent reading that, I don't really know what that means.
So it's going to depend from assignment to assignment. I'm going to leave that to the teachers to come and give an example of when a student would be able to earn a reassessment. And I think I've said this to the board before. You know, I visited another school who had a great line, like, this isn't about willy-nilly reassessment. You just roll into class and say you stayed up late last night watching Netflix. You want to take this test tomorrow. You know, that's not what it's about. It's about kids who need more time to get to the target. And so each teacher determines what needs to happen in between. And I gave that example of you can retake the driver's license test, the teacher license test, the MCATs, the GREs, the LSATs, but you have to do something in between. And so each teacher determines what that is, that's in between. And so a student who is blowing off their work, and a teacher is aware of that, which of course can be hard to figure out, they're not going to be eligible for that reassessment. So maybe, I don't know if anybody wants to give an example of a time when a kid had earned reassessment, what you had them do in the middle.
Yeah, I think that it's almost like a combination of both of your questions. A lot of times I'll say that a kid, before they can come in and reassess, they have to show me that they've done something different from what it was the first time. And so, you know, sometimes it's just like completing the homeworks that they hadn't completed beforehand. But if it's essay writing, sometimes it's like very concrete, like you have to go to the writing center, or you have to come and meet with me in callbacks and sit with me and talk about it before I'll let you revise it. And so there's still, it's very case by case. I guess that can be both good and bad, but I do feel like that teacher discretion is, you know, in English we're using it a lot because it really is, like, it's a great question, like, what is a good faith effort? And there are concrete things that I usually want them to do before they can just sit and retake a quiz or redo a summative assignment. And so it's different each time, and it's almost a conversation that we have to have. So it's a lot case by case.
Kate?
I just have two more questions related to, I guess it was, I'm looking at my notes trying to remember now. It was the grade ranges, the scoring ranges, and then the honor roll. And I was just wondering, first question, just really easy, why don't we have a highest honors? And then the second one was related to distinguished, and my first gut reaction when I saw that 93 to 100 was a distinguished, I thought 93 was kind of low to be considered distinguished. So just want to know your folks' thoughts on that.
So why don't we have highest honor? I've worked in 4 high schools. I've never seen that, nor heard of that.
My
like
high
in
school
college, like magna cum laude and summa cum laude.
Well,
and
yeah,
cum laude.
in my high school we had honors, high honors, and highest honors, and so you had the 3 tiers, and you could really, the highest honors would be the distinguished level, so you weren't crossing over proficient and distinguished into high honors.
Okay. It's not a discussion that we've had. We have 3 levels at graduation time. So their final GPA at the end, when they graduate, that's the traditional Greek system that you see with cum laude, magna cum laude, and summa cum laude. But we haven't discussed it. Certainly something that we could. For the 93 to 100, that has traditionally been an A here. And so one of the challenges when we were scoring 1 to 4 was that a lot of people were equating a 4 to a 100. And so this allows, just as people have done in traditional grading systems, to give a higher A, a lower A, a middle A, a highest A. I mean, when I was grading in my class to receive a 100, it would have to be the most outstanding work that I had seen. Whereas, I was much more apt to give a 95 if they had, missed something tiny or needed some detail to it. So again, that has traditionally been an A at the high school. That's what you need to get high honors. That's been at least the case for the last decade here.
I had, what are my notes on here? Mine were around the Principle 6, the advancement. The overall academic grade at the end of the year, is that per course?
Per course.
Okay. And then the 60 to 69 does not earn credit but eligible for summer school. So am I to assume that if they complete the summer school satisfactorily, they then get the credit?
Yes, and that's historically been our system. That's how it's been for many years, that only students between a 60 and 69 are able to come to summer school. And if they successfully complete the course, then they recover credit for that class.
Okay. And then does it automatically put them into the move on, but they're going to be getting supports?
Yes.
Okay. So they're not leapfrogging that one.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess I want to echo Lindsay's thanks for all of your work. Just putting together the presentation, I'm sure, was a time-consuming in the middle of what is probably the most chaotic month of your year. Maybe June is too. I don't know.
It's calm and smooth around here.
Yeah, I know. Smooth sailing, I'm sure, but thank you for all your efforts in trying to make what is a very complex issue very understandable. I appreciated the examples. That's how I learn. So I loved seeing the examples in all of your literature. So thank you for that, Maddie.
I wanted to echo the thanks. I've seen some of this before because I'm on the committee, and I thought everyone did a great job. I really appreciate the teachers. I know it's been a busy week for you as well. Thank you for coming. Since my son graduated, or since he came here as a freshman in 2012, I've seen the rigor at the high school increase so much. It was great when he was here, Charlie, and Jay, but I appreciate this system of learning and inquiry and evaluation that's happening among the staff, because what I'm seeing it build is relationship building between students and teachers, and hopefully self-advocacy, which is such an important life skill, no matter what you're going to do after high school. So I really appreciate that. The only thing I have a question about is there really less fiction, Margie? That really that gives me a lot of pause. But
I heard your gasp when she said it.
That's my only concern, but we can talk about that another time.
One thing that I didn't add to is something that we're working on as a pilot this year is working with a small group of students to create a portfolio of their work and to use their work and their scoring criteria to talk about how they've grown as a learner. And what we'd like to do is they'll do small presentations to a panel and invite members of the board to be part of that panel, because I think that's where you really see the benefits of this work that we've been doing when it comes out of the mouths of our students and they're able to articulate where they've grown in their learning and what their next steps are. I think that will be powerful when we're able to pull that together this year.
So, and I would like to send my comment and thank you so much to all the teachers for their thoughtful work. I mean, it's incredible how much work you guys have put in, and I appreciate all the time spent reflecting on all the feedback that was received from parents, community members, students, board members. And I also want to especially commend the administration, because clearly this is not the path that you guys would have preferred. So I really appreciate the fact that you opened up your mind and listened to what people were concerned about. So thank you especially for that. And for me, I have to say that the lesson in all of this is that in the future, I'll be a lot more careful about going forth with implementations of any educational initiative of this magnitude that isn't reflected on early on, and where we get feedback from the community, teachers, students, parents, before we embark. So I want to end with a note of just caution, but also just lesson learned, and thank you so much to everyone for having reflected and basically reevaluated a decision that was made 3 years ago by people who are not sitting at the table right now, but who were carrying the torch for whatever reason until things kind of didn't go right anymore. Thank you.
Kate.
I would like to echo the previous speaker's comments. We have new board rules. On
Jeremy's like, what are you talking about?
Yes. So we have new rules on how we're supposed to reference the previous speaker. Yes. But I do. So, sorry about that. So
I already blew it.
What
Sorry.
I wanted to echo was that, and I've been on the board for a couple of years now, and I really can't remember having such a collaborative effort brought to us by the teachers, and I really appreciate seeing how, and this kind of goes to what Maddie was saying, where you're really, creating a sense of community, I think, to have the teachers working so well together and communicating on how they're scoring across their departments, and I just really appreciate having that brought to the board so we can see that evidence of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think for us as a board, because most of our experience, well, by virtue of we can't work in the district, most of our experience is either directly at this meeting or through our children, which sometimes they're not the best communicators of in-depth detail.
We're going to teach them that.
Yes, please do. Being able to hear from the teachers and how they're working together, and seeing that it's a leadership team and the department chairs, and really getting that buy-in from the people who have to do this day in and day out with the kids is really meaningful to me, right? Because, what we don't want to be is a group that says, yeah, that looks good on paper, go make that happen, irregardless of what it means to you guys day to day, right? Like those indicators and having to put all those in. I'm not sure that was anyone's intention of trying to triple your time putting in scores. So, getting that feedback early and, implementing thoughtfully, I think it's going to be a great learning lesson for us going forward. So my only other thing that I just thought of was the idea with the study skills you had another name for it, but for the 9th and 10th graders coming out of the middle school, should this be something that Will and Ray are offering in 8th grade, so that you're not playing catch up? Or I don't know, maybe it's not a good fit there, but the sooner the better.
I think that is something that they focus on and work on. I mean, Ray and Will can speak better to that than I can, but I think that they're constantly working on students' work habits. I know that we used a lot of Durham's work when we were first using habits of work, of what their whole staff had focused on and how they had come up with measurable targets for each of their indicators of habits of work. And what we do at the middle school and high school is clearly not lockstep. We have to do what's appropriate for the level of students that we work with. But really, it was their recommendation to work on those skills, and so I do think that that's things that they're constantly working on with middle schoolers.
Yeah, and I think they do, like advisory, like the organization and study skills, and checking in with teachers. I think they do that. But I was just thinking, if you guys are still seeing that gap, maybe they can do more.
I think Lisa could maybe speak to that, but I would say that we start working on that in pre-K. And I think that Yes. Yeah, I mean, definitely we are working on that as soon as our kids walk through the door. I think what Jen is talking about is really for the students who are still struggling. And that's why it's not a class that's required of everyone.
I was glad to hear that it wasn't self-selected. Like, I don't need that.
They do receive an invitation. You've been invited to this class.
Voluntold. Yes. Yep, I'll ask Lindsay.
I just wanted to also do a quick shout out of thanks to all the people who I guess provided feedback is the best way to put that. I mean, we've had we identified a lot of the problem areas that you guys needed to work out through a whole number of means. A lot of public comment. There were community meetings that parents came out to. There was a bunch of surveys. There was a satisfaction survey that we looked at. And that all took people, sitting down and taking time out of their lives to articulate their experiences to, the board, staff members, and a lot of times you feel like you don't have time for that. And I just want to say thank you to all those people who took the time and to effort to articulate what's going on, because that leads to progress. So thank you to the whole world, basically. Who spoke up? Who spoke up?
And on that note, if we had any questions from folks that were in the audience, that while we have the group here, I know there's not as many left, but there's a few. So if you would just ask that you come up to the mic so people at home can hear you.
Pam again. Do I need to do the whole from Freeport?
No,
grade kid?
We still remember.
So again, a lot of this has been presentation more than workshop until now, so thank you, I appreciate that. I guess my general question just comes back to a lot of this was presented as fact, as researched, and I still haven't seen or heard any of that. So I'd still love to know where it says reassessment is great for kids. I know a lot of people are saying that. I'd love to see how that helps them after they get out of school, where you can't reassess, retake, tell your boss that you haven't completed something on time, and I don't get habits of work at work. I either get something done or I get in trouble. So there are certain aspects of PBE that still I have questions about, and I would love to know, beyond people saying that it's good for kids, why they're saying that. Thanks.
Hello, Chris Grimm, Freeport. I have a 9th grader and an 8th grader. In regards to what Pam has said over her last two comments, I think she said it very eloquently, and I pretty much agree with everything she said. While I have a zillion soapboxes I could get up on, I won't. And I'll try to be nice and warm and fuzzy. I'm encouraged by some of the comments I heard from the board, and I appreciate it. But before you start heaping praise on this administration, remember that they got up there and they made wholesale changes to the education of our children in a giant experiment, and that's not what our kids are there for. They're not to be experimented on. It's their lives. You know that. You had no right to do this. Having said that, later on, I believe there's a strategic vision coming up in the fall. Before you try to enshrine PBE into that, there seem like there are an awful lot of discussions that need to happen. I know that's where it's headed, and I'd like to cut that off, and I'd ask you to talk amongst yourselves at your meetings before you just rubber stamp it. As I said, there are all sorts of things in there, and the number of people I've talked to in the last 2 weeks, I'm not alone in saying habits at work. I think there were some conclusions that were reached here that I don't see the logic. The reassessment, I don't see the logic. I can understand some of it, but there are an awful lot of people that do think very much what Pam described is true. So as you go on over the next month or two, please put a pause on strategic vision, because this is not ready for prime time. It's been put there. It's wonderful to see the teachers working on it and revising it. That's what should happen. But it's not cooked yet. It's not done. Not sure it works. Nobody can tell you it works. So please take that into consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. Vali.
I have a process question. Is the board going to approve the plan? Did we discuss that at the retreat, that we were possibly going to approve this?
Did we have a vote?
No, this is just kind of a update, a workshop on what our current practices are on at the high school around teaching and learning.
I just wanted to ask why, for example, the second workshop has an approval for the goals and this one doesn't. I understand that we need to approve the goals. I think it would be great for the board to, at the next meeting possibly, include a motion for approval of the current plan, so that the community is clear where the board stands and doesn't feel that things are ever evolving and that there's little direction or leadership on this issue.
Okay.
I second what Vali just said, because I do recall discussing this as well at our last meeting. The idea that we should be giving some sort of board directive here.
Okay. We can give some thought to what that might look like and talk about that for our next meeting. All right, so unfinished business B, consideration and approval for the RSU 5 strategic goals for 2018-2019.
So in your packet, as you know, at the board retreat, we kind of, you gave us some
chicken scratch?
yeah, exactly. A rough draft, right? And so this is now, in draft form. I'm happy to take any feedback. If it's just minor tweaks that we need tonight or not any, then I think we're ready to vote on these. I will say that the the principals looked these over at our meeting earlier this week, and there was one suggestion. You're really only voting on the RSU 5 goals, but I did want to provide you with the backup because those are really kind of modeling our next steps to success, right? So there's one thing that I want to add based upon the discussion with the administration, and that's on strategic objective 2 under improved teacher and administrator effectiveness. If you remember from our retreat, you guys had wanted, or I think we all decided that we want to attract and retain staff. So we worked on some activities that would support that, and one activity we'd like to add is to really analyze the data by job title to assess, do we really have a problem in this area, right? So we just talked about maybe having different groupings like administration, teachers, the people, and then the support document of like ed techs, bus drivers, and try to gather some data to know, is there an area where we really are struggling with this? Is it one area? Is it multiple areas? And then that would help us to really target the groups where we have an issue and not focus so much on the groups where we don't.
Sorry, maybe I missed it. What data? I understand you want to organize it by job title so you understand if there's an issue in a particular department, but what data are you analyzing?
Well, just looking at openings, or?
Yeah, we would look at how, because it's about attracting and retaining, right? So I think we really would look at retention, right? I don't know how, I'd have to give it a lot of thought if we were trying to I don't see us going out and surveying people like, why haven't you ever applied to RSU 5, right? So I think that those where our other ones are, but we're wondering, maybe we really don't have an issue with retaining administrators. And so we just want to have the data in front of us about, what is our percent of turnover. And I don't know how far back we could go. I just thought it was a good example of let's gather some data.
So you're talking about looking at a new lens on data that exists, or a new way of gathering data? This would be some new kind of evaluation?
No, it would just be really digging into the data, and I don't think we've ever done that. So we have the exit survey. That would be one piece of data, like, okay, is something popping there? But I think it's really looking at, let's just say, I don't know, I'm making up these numbers, but let's say that we have 40 new teachers. I think we had 26 new teachers. I think it would be interesting to see, okay, of the 26 openings, how many of those were just people retiring? And how many of those are people going to another district? And how many of those are people that are really moving out of state because their spouse got transferred and that's where it was taking them?
I always think it's a good idea to look at that data. I think it's helpful to, there's quantitative and qualitative data. So
I agree.
I would ask that if we did that, we'd look at both.
Yeah, agreed.
I know you kind of were joking about asking people why they didn't apply to RSU 5, but have you thought about asking people why they did apply to RSU 5?
We ask that almost in every interview with new teachers.
Hopefully not in a surprised way.
No, right. Exactly. So I do not do, but I do not do second interviews with support staff, but even in the first interview, frequently the first question will be, why are you choosing RSU 5? And I will say I'm impressed with how many people are going to our website at times like that, and I can just report kind of anecdotally on what they've said this summer. They feel like it's a very attractive district, and a lot of times I will say they know somebody who's teaching here, and they've heard good things from the people that are currently here, and that's drawing them to our district.
It's almost like a bias question, though, because you're asking
Yeah.
somebody while they're asking for the
true.
job.
Well, that's
what
what I
are
was
they going
gonna
to say?
say.
I had no other options.
No.
Yeah.
No. It's good to have, but of course they're going to the website. If they're at all adept in job searching.
I
that's
will
the
say
first
they're
thing you
pretty
do.
honest. Some people will say, I just want to get to Southern Maine. Okay, so that's an answer I've also heard.
I do like I know somebody who works there and they love
Yeah.
their job. To me, that's an interesting piece of information.
But to your point, was thinking go back around and ask staff that are here.
They're here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think it's different as you reflect back on when you, why
In
are
the
you
hot seat.
staying?
Yeah, right. Or when you're running.
Obviously, when you're applying for a job, I would be very surprised if those answers vary all that much.
And I think that does support what Maddie is saying about wanting not only quantitative but qualitative.
I'm wondering if the union already has that kind of data for us. That would be really, retention data would be really helpful for us to see.
Questions about the document. Thank you so much for putting this together. This is great. And in the first strategic objective, under 4, implementation of phonics pre-K and K, is this supposed to be the response to the low achievement that we saw in the FNP results for grades 1 through 4?
So I'm probably going to have Cynthia answer that more fully than me, but yes, that is, always we're looking at the data and we're thinking, what's missing? How can we get better? We know we're very keyed into the research that if you're not reading on grade level by the end of third grade, that it puts you at a much higher risk for dropping out of school and being successful. And this is the piece we think has kind of been missing. We haven't had, I don't think, a systemic program at pre-K and K.
And my question is, if I remember correctly, the FNP measured frequency but not comprehension?
No, it does all three.
All three,
It
okay.
does comprehension questions, decoding, and fluency. How choppy are you reading?
Okay.
That was one of the reasons they were lower than the other one that was just comprehension.
Right. On the NWEA, the NWEA that your students take, it does very little. Well, it can't measure fluency, right? But it can measure. There are some questions in there about decoding, but it's going about it in a different way than when you're hearing the student pronounce the words.
So basically, we're trying to address that issue with a low FNP in grades 1 through 4 by addressing it early, pre-K and K. Okay, perfect.
Is that a new program altogether?
It is. Will visited when he was on vacation. He did some work while he was in vacation in England. I think it is a program that comes out of there. Could you go to the mic?
He went and visited schools while he was out there, and it's called synthetic phonics. There are lots of phonics programs, but it's all on sounds. It's a shifting and focusing rather on instead of like letter ID as a focus. It's the early sounds, learning those first, and there's an order to those, and there's lots of drills, and they've had lots of professional development already. All the administrators attended at least 2 days of it with Colleen Summit, and she's also came on one of the first two PLD days that we had, and the pre-K teachers had training with her for a full day, and it was excellent. I heard wonderful things from the pre-K teachers. In fact, they said, emailed me right away, can we change our SLO? Because we focused on letter ID as part of a component of that, and so I immediately got on that, and we're going to talk about how we're going to change the scoring of that. So they're all excited, every single one of the pre-K teachers, because I feel like they've felt that there's been a hole, and that they're hoping that this will help ratchet that up, the ringer up for those kids, and so that by third grade we'll all have proficient readers. So.
And does it mesh well with the Teachers College program that we have in kindergarten and above?
So the kindergarten, we're using a different phonics program. So part of that for kindergarten, so it's the FNP, and so they're getting training on, their kindergarten teachers are getting training on that as well, and so we're going to be analyzing that. How did this work? How does the other one work? And how do they flow with Teachers College? So we have a plan for that, which we could talk about at some future meeting. But so we'll look at the data and see how well, that meshes together. But they're two different ones, and so initially we were going to pilot the pre-K, the synthetic phonics in just the one school, but then all of the principals got together and they met with Colleen, and after that one meeting and going through the materials, they were all on board and all excited to do it. So initially it was just going to be a pilot. So we're going to do one program in kindergarten, and then the idea is, if you get to a certain level, you won't need it over time. If you have it really grounded and really well implemented in the pre-K, that you might need a few for kindergarten. Like there may be a few students left in kindergarten that need more work on that, and that we could pull them in groups with the synthetic phonics. But that after that, they'll be smooth sailing. That's the whole idea. So
Unfortunately, though, not all of our kids go to the pre-K program.
Right.
Only like a third.
Right.
So
So the kindergarten teachers are they're the idea is to keep training everybody, and so that they'll have the skill set as well. And there were a lot of materials involved in the sound cards and all that. So if do any of you have pre-K students? No. Okay. So
not yet.
No. So so that's how that the idea is hit them early. And have a real systemic approach to it, and it's done daily. And the other part that's exciting is that the trainer comes back and looks at student data with the pre-K teachers regularly. So it's ongoing. Okay, why is this one not making success? What are we doing here? And she's giving them feedback. So it's like a coaching cycle as well.
Well, I'm glad that the teachers got a sense of how the program works and that they were so excited about it.
They were very excited, and are.
We want to make sure that they are on board and they buy into this program before we implement it.
There was lots of discussion prior to that. In fact, Will was like, "Do we have the money? Can we get it?" So it's embedded in our project for Title II funding. So, so they're very excited.
So in that same strategic objective, number 6, communication. Point 2, it says principal updates to board, but there's nothing there about communicating with parents. And I think it's essential that there be a specific point about letters to parents when anything happens that relates to PBE implementation. But my biggest point was to bring up an additional strategic objective, which would be increased teacher voice. We had at the retreat a discussion about whether we wanted to have a separate goal or just embedded in the current goals that we have, or the strategic objectives that we already have. And unfortunately, I don't see it front and center enough. There's only one little mention about collaborative work. And so I would like to ask the board how they would feel about having a 4th strategic objective, which would be specifically for increased teacher voice, and could have action steps such as teacher surveys for all the major educational initiatives, which we talked about, and developing processes for collecting teacher feedback at the building level when building-based decisions are made. Would also include provide training for teachers and coaches on ways to participate in the budget process, because there are sometimes glitches in that system, and especially some of the new teachers and coaches do not know how to approach the budget process through the current channel. And so that would be something that would be helpful, so that we as a board have that voice represented through the administrators, but the teachers know how to get their voice heard at the administrative level. And then the last one, this is something new, but something that I've been thinking about, would be something similar to what we have for a satisfaction survey for parents, but maybe every other year have it for parents and every other year have it for teachers. So it would be the equivalent of a workplace satisfaction survey that would allow them to answer just a few questions and would give us a good gauge on how satisfied they're with the work, which ties to retention and also to the issue that we identified as a board about teacher voice, and wanted to give teachers bigger voice.
Maddie.
It's just an initial response. My first thinking on it, so I'm open. But I wonder if we might be able to accomplish what you're talking about, what the previous speaker was talking about. If instead of adding a 4th objective, if we could add a 6th strategy to strategic objective number 2 called engagement, that would have 2 parts to it, which would include community and staff. And community stakeholders would include parents, and staff stakeholders would primarily be teachers. And it could include a survey as one of those steps.
I think, to the previous speaker, I don't know how that works, point of Right, once removed. Trying to make sure it's sort of front and center in our decision making on all the things. I mean, I'm not sure we need a separate strategic objective for it, but I would be in favor of seeing, what's the strategy in each of the existing strategic objectives to make sure that we're capturing that teacher voice, and in the number 2, which specifically speaks to effectiveness and retaining, the idea of that survey. I like the rotating idea. In corporate America, the best places to work surveys is something that my employer does every year, not because they want to put up the sticker on the wall, although I'm sure they like that too, but they said, from what they say, is they get a lot of really good information because it's anonymous. I know you don't like anonymous, but it does provide, employees, it provides people the outlet for, do you feel like, your company values you? Do you feel like you're fairly compensated? Do you, all of those type of things that we want to know. But if you just, as a board, if we just ask the teacher, of course they're going to say, sure, yes, thank you. But, I like that idea of trying to solicit that feedback from the staff, to help us just inform our decisions on things. We can think we're doing a great job, but if we can actually see otherwise, then that might change our opinions on some things. So that would be my take on the teacher voice piece.
Right, I need a summary.
I'm just kidding. So add.
I would like to see a
strategy
strategy in each of the
one.
strategic
Yeah, I
objectives on
support
how
that.
we're capturing teacher voice.
Yeah, I support that.
And I like the survey. I mean, not every year potentially, but some sort of outlet for capturing that.
Just to add on to that, I think that like tonight was a really good example of like how this all kind of came together, and the teachers really valued that we asked their opinions, and it was a really big collaborative effort. I think like running with that and adding that to this is going to be really valuable to them too. I think they're going to really appreciate that added kind of spot for them.
I can be down with that, Michelle. I like the word engagement, and I would just ask that it be included in this document. Because to me, engagement gets to everything that we're interested in around retention, around stakeholder involvement, around the kind of collaboration that we've seen tonight that we want to see more of. So I just ask that be thoughtfully included.
So I'm tempted to put it under communication in each one, but it would then have under activities its own number. Is everyone okay with that?
Say again what?
So you can see that in each goal we have a communication number, and I think Valley, it was you that pointed out that on strategic objective 1, number 6, that we want to put principal updates to board/parents, and like I would just create a number 6 that would have something specific about teacher voice there.
I don't know. I want to see. I want it to be its own.
Okay.
Because I don't want it to get sort of lost in the all the people we're going to talk to. Like, I think that clearly needs to be one that we're highlighting, in my opinion.
So it would be a number 7, and it would say, instead of like communication is number 6, number 7 is
staff engagement.
Oh, staff engagement. Okay, thank you. Okay.
So shouldn't, for everything or most things that we do, shouldn't we have a more like community engagement, and it's staff or stakeholder engagement? And it's, then you list the 3, or how many do we have? I think we have 3. Primary stakeholders.
And get rid of the communication?
No, it would, so stakeholder engagement is its own strategy. action strategy. Because I feel like engagement is different than communication, where you're just like outwardly sending, here's what we're doing.
Correct.
It's one way.
Yep.
But I also, I'm kind of on the fence because I really like the idea of the emphasis on the staff piece. But I don't know.
Well, you could do that by calling it primary stakeholder engagement and make sure that teacher is number one in the second column there. So if that's what we're talking about, right? We're adding
Yes.
we're adding a strategy to each objective that would say that's what we're wordsmithing right now. And I like calling out primary stakeholders because I don't want to exclude parent voice and community voice, but I also want to see the word engagement and I want to see the word teacher, because I don't want us to forget in the busyness, and God knows what's going to come up this year. I don't want us to forget how important this is to us right now.
So it could be, I mean, obviously, so I'm thinking that, are you wanting teacher, parents, and
other staff? It may be coaches sometimes, or it may be ed techs, or
So teachers and staff.
as appropriate. Teachers, yeah, and staff, yeah.
teacher, parent, staff? So, I mean, obviously, that's very easy to do under strategic planning, right? So so under obviously very easy to do, I think, under like the teaching and learning one, right? The implementation of proficiency-based learning.
But when it's easy, but I don't know if it is. Right?
Well, I mean, if my mind can come up with a thought, that, you know, in the moment, it feels easy to me, right? But when I get into an area like improved teacher and administrator effectiveness, and we have, I guess I could come up with something there, because definitely the creation of school goals, we should be, you know, engaging parents in that. Okay, I think, you know, I can give it a stab.
Yep. Where your survey could come into? Is it?
Right, it
Right,
could.
the staff.
It could. That's why I'm thinking, I think it could work.
That's what I was this proposed semi-biannual survey can specifically speak to each of these things, you know, current objectives, you know, anyway. I'm having a thought too, I just can't articulate it.
I'm just a little worried, and I completely like the idea of teacher, staff, parent in there. But then where is community and student once we get into the weeds? And so I'm struggling with, right.
And, you know, and I hear what you're saying. So to me, you know, it might be, if we go with the idea of, where did I write it down? Primary stakeholder engagement, you know, when I get into it, you know, it could be that there's not one group listed, you know, until I really give it some thought. I also worry about capacity, right? So,
Yeah.
right.
So, I mean, one thought could be teacher and other primary stakeholder.
Right,
'cause
right, right.
Oh, yes.
I'm not as worried about that because we will have student representative here. And, I mean, I think to have a catch-all category could be great, like as needed, as determined appropriate at the time. But, I mean, there's a reason why we're in particular thinking about teachers and parents. And I think if we get into worrying too much about is everybody represented, I don't think we're looking to exclude, it's just we're looking to highlight.
Right. Okay. So do you want to do those and then we'll...
Because there aren't any tweaks that are substantial on the board goals, I think you could go ahead and vote on the board goals.
Right, 'cause really
You're not, that's just a working backup document that we came up with, I think, 2 years ago, just so you can see. It's really like our success criteria, right? Because I think many times districts have goals that are so broad that you really get to the end of the year or the end of the 2 years and you're not sure whether you've met them. And so that's just a working document that you don't vote on, but the board goals you do.
So if that's the case, I feel like, I don't know. So this becomes the working document in the background, and this is really where the work happens. But I would like to memorialize it in our goals so people recognize because you go to our website and you see this, you don't see this. So the highlight of wanting to make sure we're capturing that, it's lost to everyone who's not watching this video. So, I mean, I don't have a proposal on how you would incorporate it, but I would like to see it somewhere in the goals so that it can be recognized that this is one of our goals.
I think we're back to what Valley originally proposed, which is it's got to be its own strategic objective.
Or just listed in the strategic objectives we have, right? I mean,
as an action strategy.
I mean, we have action strategies, right?
Yes.
Is there a difference between action steps and strategies, or is that just an error?
One of them is a strategy and two of them are steps.
That's just an error on our part.
And just so you know, on this one, the third one just says strategies, not action strategies.
Okay. So there's some...
just little...
Yes, that's some tweaking. So I'm happy to go back then and put that into the board goal document around...
Because I actually think it would, right? Because
primary stakeholder engagement. Yeah.
Because, I mean, these 1 through 6 here is what carries on to the second column here. So we would be adding in that primary, and it would appear on this.
Yes, we'll figure out where to put it in this. So in that case, I would say you're not ready to vote on it.
I would agree. Lindsay.
Okay, so the overarching goal, focus on student achievement through improved student-centered teaching and learning. And then the evidence for that, which is overarching all these strategic objectives, is improvement on assessments collected on the district scorecard. My memory of the district scorecard, as it was last presented to us, was that results weren't in yet, and we were kind of looking at half of the results. And so what I would like to see in the next iteration of this is, when do we start getting all the full picture on a yearly basis, so that I just feel like the results have kind of sprinkled in, and I want to be able to evaluate, are we achieving our goal with this evidence? And I find that the evidence has been kind of sprinkled.
So it's going to always be sprinkled.
It's always going to be sprinkled.
It's going to be
reality check.
That's a reality check because it sprinkles in.
Yeah. But isn't there? Can't we set up like?
But to me, what you need to, what we did at the retreat is, look at the scorecard and do your noticings and, your evaluation at that time on what we have there. And I think that if you're doing it at the same time every year, we have this challenge with teacher effectiveness around the SLO. But basically every May they're going to be looking at data with whatever the most current data is at that point. But because the MEA comes in October, we hope, and we get we have the NWEA in May, and the F&P, we really see that in June. It makes sense to be looking at that. Whatever the current data is, it makes sense to do that at your retreat. But you're always going to have probably something that's not in. We hope that the state gets better about getting more timely. So usually in August, to me, that's the less sprinkling that's going on, the least amount.
Well, that's so unsatisfying.
I know. I'm sorry.
You'll have new MEA data next August from this year.
Right.
All right. There was just a particularly large hole because of something that happened. I can't remember.
That's because of the MEA.
Okay.
It is the MEA. Well, not until October. That's what they've been messaging.
So
to us.
next August, I'm going to be a lot more satisfied.
No,
You'll get this year's data.
But at least
so that'll be
last year.
new. You'll get the MEA results we're getting in October. November 5th is when it goes public, just FYI. So you'll have that new in August on the scorecard, as well as the F&P.
But it was the 2017 data.
It'll be the year before, but
What
it's going to
about
be new to you.
the new year?
The other things you didn't have was, I don't think the AP scores were in yet, because that comes from College Board. SAT is part of the MEA.
Right.
Even though it's called SAT, it's in the same report that we get, so they'll come out together. Even though the kids have the scores back, the report doesn't come out until the same time as the rest. It is a conundrum. It's just exactly how Becky described it.
But I mean, it also, it's difficult because they take the tests at various times throughout the year, so you wouldn't expect them all to come back at the same time. But it is sort of frustrating that next August we'll be looking at last year's data, almost 2 years behind.
On the MEA.
On the MEA,
MEA,
only, yeah.
right.
You'll have very fresh F&P data from May, June, and NWA, or map assessment. You'll have those two. Those will be right out of the gate.
Right. Almost makes it even harder.
Yeah.
Right. This is really new data. That's a year-old data, so maybe they're not really equal data, but whatever.
Well, that's why you really, you've heard me say what's important is that we're capturing it so that it's trends over time. And I hope by next year you'll really be able to start seeing that.
I guess
So any one data point shouldn't hugely influence the direction in which we're moving. So, we've even looked at math, right? You can see that math is an area of weakness, and that's why we've targeted that.
I guess I hear everything you're saying, and I understand as much as I can understand. But I just find it a little bit difficult to swallow that the evidence of all our work is the district scorecard. It just seems like, isn't there another, way to look at what we're doing?
Well, for me, where I struggle is I look at these strategic objectives, and I'm on board with all of these, and I'm on board with the goal and the evidence. I'm kind of feeling like you, but for me, I like to roll it up, or roll it down. And for me, it's a huge leap to go from the district scorecard to
the objectives.
Right.
How does that connect?
Right. Like, what does our long-term strategic plan have to do with the district scorecard? And how will it flow through there at some point? So, for me, I just, and probably not the right way to do it, but I kind of look at the 3 strategic objectives as, but I mean, we probably should tie them in better in the evidence piece, because I see your point of, there's probably evidence of, student-centered learning that doesn't necessarily show up on the district scorecard.
Maybe.
Correct. You just have to decide how much in the weeds you want to get on that, right? If we create a strategic plan that results in a decrease in student achievement, that's worrisome to me.
I wasn't implying that that's what we should do.
No, but I'm trying to connect to your question of what does that have to do with the, what does the district scorecard have to do with the strategic plan, right? And if you're looking short term, I agree. We're not going to write that plan by the end of the year and see an immediate increase. But long term, you should be doing that. The other thing I think to just put out there, which is why, so you're all getting much more observant or critical, because I think
you were clueless before.
Because I think last year we put on there something about for evidence the MEA results, and I said, oh, that when we were talking about it, I said that just feels way too narrow, right? That's one data point. I said let's expand it because we can really expand the district scorecard to include any points of data that we want to do. So that's why I felt like it didn't limit us. So if we decide to do something like something that's really quick and doable every other year, around I forget what you called it at your workplace, that survey.
Oh, best places to work survey.
Yeah. Right. The best places to work, we can add that to the scorecard, right? And I think that's the way I guess I want you to think about it. We have to get the new data person on board because, I do feel that you're wanting more and more data, which is all great if we're going to use it, right? And so I think whatever you're wanting to use to evaluate that for evidence, that we can add that as long as we're not adding too many things and it becomes unwieldy.
Right.
When I showed this to the administrators, one of the administrators said, this feels so unwieldy, right? Like, it's too much or whatever. And I said, no.
The existing scorecard? Or this?
No, the goals, right? When I was running through the goals and the action strategies, and I said, no, it's just robust, but it's doable, but, there is that tipping point of, you want it achievable.
Right. Right. And I mean, I think that might be, and that was sort of what was forming in my head was, is the district scorecard, is that strictly made up of standardized testing scores? Or right now it is, or can we capture other data like the satisfaction info and those sort of things, our attrition rate, like our turnover rate, like as you guys are, working through your work on, are we, attracting, retaining, what we're learning is that, a typical turnover rate is X, and so that's a good key indicator that we want to keep track of over time, like those sort of things. I mean, to me, the district scorecard, to me, there's a lot of information in there, and I'm not sure I use all of that in my decision making, so maybe we don't need everything that's already in there if we're going to add new things in an effort to not make it overly cumbersome.
So everything that's in there, administration is using in some format. It's not all standardized testing, so there's the persistence, right? How many of our kids are going to college, those kind of things. Our graduation rate, that's not standardized testing, right? But
I think those are great.
Yeah, right. And that's what I mean. So we, definitely we didn't try to put everything in there, but everything that's in there, it's important information for us to capture on some level.
Yep.
I would not recommend at this point getting rid of anything in there.
Yeah, that satisfies me that the district scorecard could expand to have different dimensions with key stats that have arisen throughout the year that show some form of progress or challenge. I like that. It reminds me of an annual report for a nonprofit. The idea of it, that you get a snapshot of the year, and here's our growth, here's what we're struggling with, blah, blah, blah. So great, thanks.
Okay. So you will go back, do your minor tweaks, because I don't think we had, huge material changes, and then we'll bring that back.
Thank you.
Okay. You good? Okay. New business? None. Personnel? Public comment? I think we've lost everyone.
Yes.
Are we still looking to hire positions that didn't fill, for example, language at the high school?
I think we're still advertising for the Latin teacher.
Okay.
But we have a great backup plan with Diane Whitmore. And so unless she, that.
I could have asked you that out of meeting, sorry. I'm curious about the state of language teachers in our state.
Okay, so I would take a motion for consideration and approval to enter into executive session as outlined in 1 MRSA Section 4056A for the purpose of discussing the superintendent's evaluation. Valerie, Kate, all those in favor? None opposed, thanks.